Hi everybody, Brian here wishing you a wonderful Monday and a great week ahead. We're continuing to look at Scripture and to see if we can find in it not only the history of the people of God and the theological constructs and moral teaching that we traditionally look to the Bible to show us, and find there perhaps a guide to the nature of human soulfulness as well. It's my kind of orientation that we need all three. We certainly need a theological reflection. We need to know how the people of God over its entire history have learned how to live with each other and with the world they share with others under the umbrella of understanding that this is God's world. And we need to know how God interacts with us through the gentle prodding of the divine rhythm, the Spirit of God, that is sensed by each of us by the soul that dwells within us. In the modern era, it seems to me, we've kind of lost sight of that soul. It's been scientifically pushed to the edge, and for a lot of people pushed over the edge, that while we have these experiences of meaningfulness, joy, gratitude, beauty, etc., that those are just constructs of our brain that give us pleasure in life, but they don't have any external meaning or significance outside of our own human appreciation of them. But that's what soulfulness means. Soulfulness means that these lovely experiences we have of life are actually very real parts of the universe, and our experience of them is authentic and important. Other faith traditions are clearer, perhaps, than Christianity has been about how to nurture and care for the soul. One thinks of Buddhism, certainly, as being a religion almost entirely created to help nurture prayer and the soul. And any faith tradition, actually, when it has a more monastic or mystical approach. So you can think of the dialogue that's going on between meditators in Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity, the growing appreciation that Jews have for the Kabbalah, Muslims have for Sufism, etc. So that, this kind of reality is there. But we haven't paid as much attention. We began this series months ago with a look at Abraham, and we're going to spend the last few months looking at Jesus of Nazareth. So today I'd just like to start with the first few verses of the Gospel according to John. Many people, especially modern biblical scholars, kind of look askance at John's Gospel. It is, in a sense, more of the story of the experience of Jesus as a soul-filled person who sort of resonated his soul-filledness into the lives of the people he was around, and less of the more straightforward or perhaps more direct and simple telling of his moral and religious teachings. Therefore, it's easy to sort of say there's less in John's Gospel than in the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke that are original and definitive actual sentences of Jesus, that they've gone through a process of being moderated or reflected in another way. But, it's my theory that all four of the Gospels were in fact written not to pass on simply the biography of Jesus, not simply to be faithful translators of his basic teaching, nor even to be simply the students who are passing on the kind of core wisdom. They want to do all of that. All four of them do want to do that. But they also want to imbue the reader's experience of the Gospels they wrote down, want to imbue that with the experience people had of sitting at the feet of Jesus when he did teach, or being present to him when miraculous things seemed to happen around him. They wanted us to experience Jesus as they had experienced Jesus. They wanted us to know, as they had come to believe, that this spirit that was incredibly alive in Jesus was incredibly alive in them, especially when they were together as a community, and that they believed that it would continue to be continually alive in the experience of people for generations to come, which I happen to believe is the reason they wrote these Gospels, was to convey that hope and expectation. So I'm certainly excited about the work that modern scholars are doing to kind of find the real Jesus, to uncover what's called Q, the original, or at least early collection of sayings of Jesus. I think that's all really exciting and wonderful. I've said that, though, about every other aspect of Scripture. But it does seem tragic to me when scholarship says anything other than that is some kind of, in Scripture because of some kind of political manipulation to create a religious structure around Jesus for the benefit of the apostles, or to keep an institution going. I think that's reading institutionalism, which we certainly experience in the church, back into those New Testament readings. And I think there's incredible value to the mystical experience of Jesus, right alongside his moral and theological teaching. So you don't get much more mystical, perhaps, than the first chapter of John's Gospel. I'm going to read it first from the New Revised Standard, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, the official scriptures, or the official translation we use in the liturgy. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. That's just verses 1 to 5. Now, it's beautiful, and I think we all love that passage and the continuation that we'll look at next week. I think we get that meaning decidedly from that translation, but it's easy for it to wash over us because we've heard it in the liturgy. The words are sort of deeply embedded, at least for the people who read the Bible, as one of the most poetic places you can see. So this is why I'm going to read it again, this time from Eugene Peterson's translation in his book, The Message. Not because it's a better translation, it's probably not a better translation, but Peterson discovered through his scholarly work, primarily with the Hebrew Bible, that the original text was written very idiomatically, which is to say very much encased in local metaphor and image, and spoken at a kind of a very local level of how to convey information. But that his experience of the Bible within Christian communities, and especially in the liturgy, was that it was raised to kind of an exalted state, and that we were missing some of the kind of perhaps more folksy or down-to-earth stuff, and that we were getting the theology without getting the human experience. So these are those first few verses again, but from Eugene Peterson. The Word was first, the Word present to God, God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing came into being without him. What came into existence was life, and the life was the light to live by. The life light blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. Again, I think we all feel stirred by those beautiful words of John. But the point I really want to get across is what John astonishingly is saying in these few words. Everybody's first experience, all of the disciples of Jesus, everybody he met on the dusty roads of Galilee and Judea and right into the streets of Jerusalem, everybody who experienced him first as a full human being standing in front of them. And this at a time when a lot of the monarchs in the world, especially around Judea and Galilee, thought their monarchs were at least demigods, if not gods themselves. Don't forget that Jesus was born under the reign of Augustus Caesar, who the empire claimed was Son of God. And that became a title for Roman emperors right up to, for a long time, and certainly under Tiberius, the emperor under whom Jesus was crucified. So there is this, there is this sense that there are people running around who might in fact be angels or images of God. But that's not how people experience Jesus in any way. They experience him as an ordinary rabbi coming out of Galilee, deeply, passionately concerned for Torah, for the life of the Jewish community, for someone who cared deeply about the covenant between human beings and God given to Moses. And he cared deeply about it in a very specific, emerging rabbinical way, which is to say he read Scripture, he allowed Scripture to imbue him, and he gave it back to people in a way that gave them a sense of liveliness. We're just at a point in the summer where we're listening to the Gospel of Matthew, and gradually his disciples, even before there's any kind of discussion of him being the Son of God or anything like that, who are stumbling little bit by little bit to recognize that their experience of him, though initially as a man, was also initially as an extraordinary man. Somebody who could, for example, in the case of Peter and his brother Andrew, just draw them right out of their everyday lives into becoming disciples that are following behind him. There was something enticing and exciting about Jesus. In the modern world, I think, because we're so consumer-oriented, we think of, what can we get from Jesus? Are we going to get a nice meal like the 5,000 people on the side of the hill? Are we going to get some kind of physical complaint healed by Jesus? Are we going to get our 20/20 vision back if we were to ask Jesus, or a loved one saved from a challenging illness? We're always interested in what we can get, especially when we've determined what we want to get before we even think about Jesus. But around Jesus, the gospel stories are very clear that it was that Jesus had something extraordinary to give, and that what Jesus was giving was absolutely experienced by the people. But it wasn't what they were anticipating or expecting. It was all good, it was all lively, it was all, they felt filled with hope and the zing and beauty of life for having experienced Jesus. But they weren't rallied into a new revolutionary army to overcome the Romans, or a kind of theological new governmental community to take over from the Sanhedrin and the high priest, or to overwhelm the Herodian monarchy that was running the Jewish world for the Romans, of course. But none of that was there. And so I think it's extraordinary that John gives us, right from the beginning, this sense that while people knew were interested in Jesus, wanted to hear his voice, wanted to be in his presence, wanted him to touch them, that at the same time, what was being experienced by those people was something unexpected, healthier, more whole, more joyous, more lively than they were even really looking for. They might have been looking for a political solution or an economic hope, or just somebody who could interpret Scripture in a way that made sense to them. They were looking for somebody who could bring the holiness of the temple right into whatever village they were living in, instead of having to trudge to Jerusalem for the various festivals throughout the year. And they got this sort of bursting through of something that they experienced as eternal. And that even when Jesus left their village behind, even if they never saw him again, they were touched by the fact that in meeting this ordinary rabbi, they had experienced something that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a kind of conversion of the heart that John the Baptist talked about. But they actually experienced it in this interaction with Jesus. So I would appreciate it if you, again, as we look at Scripture for the insight about the soul, which we're going to look at exactly the same passage next week and try to uncover a little bit more of that. But perhaps we can get ready for that by realizing that Jesus, yes, was a teacher, yes, was some kind of miracle worker, yes, was very charismatic and could draw communities together. Yes, he was a very clear teacher within Israel. But the interesting thing is that the enthusiasm that he engendered among a great many people was not an enthusiasm for the traditional understanding of what a Messiah would be. Indeed, there was nothing there that the people of Israel could expect as any kind of insight or hope for political, economic, or social revolution that would make them feel more like they were living the life that Moses and David might have hoped for them. But instead, they were just regenerated. They felt that experience of joy and optimism, and they knew they had touched something, that joy and optimism, that was more true and more eternal than the temple itself, the capacity of the Roman Empire to oppress, the economic conditions they found themselves in, or whatever their personal lives had facing them. Yeah, they had all that, but at exactly the same time, they had this sense of eternal joy, hope, and thanksgiving. And that, I think, is the doorway that we get in Christianity to begin to recognize the soul. If we need a Jesus for our soulfulness, then let it be the Jesus who, right in his humanity, right in the dust and sweat of how he ministered and interacted with people, he presented a sense of eternal truth, eternal joy and optimism, the love of God, in that very moment, and that we have to have both. And we have, to this day, continued to separate them out. His humanity's over here, like our humanity's over here, and his capacity to know God and God's love and God's grace is over here. But we have to recognize, and John helps us do this, that this was the experience that his disciples had. Not one or the other, but both together. And that given the fact that most of us are pretty ordinary people who only experience the extraordinariness of connection to God, perhaps rarely or occasionally in our lives, John clearly wants us to know that from the very beginning, this is vibrating in this. And that is the Jesus he wants us to know. So let's take a better look at Jesus through the lens of John's Gospel, perhaps. Thanks for listening. Have a great week. And we'll be listening to exactly the same verses next week, but from a slightly different perspective. Take care, and God bless.